Welcome to Challenge the Narrative. In this show, I will not tell you what to believe. I will not tell you what to think. In this show, I want you to be curious, to ask questions, to question the things that you believe, that you've been taught. Are they proven? Are they true? Are they based on facts? Or are they based on speculation or theories? Welcome to Challenge the Narrative. So, episode 2, we need our narrative. Today's narrative is the idea that there isn't enough water on Earth for the biblical flood of Noah's time to have happened. I've heard people say this to me, and on the face of it, it seems to have logical sense. You look at all the water in the oceans as they are today, and it's not enough to cover. Even if you melted the polar ice caps and Antarctica, if you melted all the ice, yes, the sea level would rise, but it wouldn't be enough to cover all of the high places and all of the high mountains. The narrative is there isn't enough water. The biblical flood could not have happened the way it says in the Bible. And to further illustrate that point, here is a diagram that sort of shows a kind of a visual of what the whole world's water would look like. Doesn't look like a whole lot, does it, when you put it into that kind of context? But there it is. That is all of the world's water. So why challenge this narrative? Well, first of all, this narrative is based on two assumptions. The first assumption is that all of the water we have on the Earth's surface at the moment is the same amount of water there has been or would have been at the time of Noah's flood. And this assumption is one that actually has a weakness where it could potentially be debunked, and in quite a large way, threefold, in fact. But we'll get to that in a second. Firstly, if we're going to look at the idea of the flood of Noah, the biblical flood, roughly around about 4,500 years ago, one of the things we have to consider is, okay, where did this water come from? If you ask people, they'll say, well, it rained, didn't it? It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. That's the story. And there was all this rain and that caused the flood. Not quite right. Not quite accurate. Yes, there was rain, but you might be surprised to know that that's not the actual primary source of where the water came from, according to the Bible. It's very easy to miss. There's a very short bit of scripture, but I'll show you this in Genesis. So I'm just going to read a small part here from Genesis 7 within verse 11. And it says, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Notice that? On that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth. So basically, under the ground, there was water under the ground that broke up through the ground. That's the first thing that happened. And then, yes, also it rained. And a lot of people miss that. When they think about the biblical flood, when they think about Noah's flood, they just think about the rain. But it actually says first, the springs of the great deep broke forth. And the reason that that's such an important point, such a small detail but very important detail, is recent scientific discoveries about the amount of water that is actually trapped about 700 kilometers under the Earth's surface. And this is something you can look up yourself. There are lots of articles online that all talk about this discovery, about this extra water that's under the surface of the Earth. So here's just one of the articles that I found. I'll have a quick read. Scientists have discovered a massive ocean under the surface of the Earth, which challenges the traditional theory that a comet impact is the reason behind the origin of water on Earth. Here is what the researchers revealed. This underground ocean, concealed within the blue rock known as ringwoodite, lies approximately 700 kilometers or 435 miles below Earth's surface. Surprisingly, the volume of this subterranean sea is estimated to be 3 times larger than all the oceans on the Earth's surface combined. The search to unearth the origins of Earth's water led researchers to this massive discovery. Okay, so what does this mean for challenging the narrative? Well, it just goes to show that there certainly is enough water there, because if you add the amount of water on the surface at the moment with another 3 times, so you've got 4 times the current amount of water available on Earth, including that of the poles that hasn't yet melted, that's a lot of water. And I would assert enough to cover the heights necessary for the biblical flood of Noah. Now, obviously, if the flood of Noah occurred as described in the Bible, then a lot of that water must have receded and been sort of entrapped back down into the earth. Now, obviously, that would be quite a supernatural thing, but then we are talking about supernatural events if we're going by the biblical narrative. Now, do I know for sure that 4 times the amount of water in the ocean would be enough to cover the highest mountains? I can't do the maths on that, I'll be honest. I'm not a maths genius. I can't work out those kind of volumes. I'll leave that to somebody else. But that leads me on to the second assumption about the flood of Noah. And that is that all the high places, the mountains such as the Himalayas and all these places, were exactly as they are now before the flood. The general narrative about plate tectonics is that we've done various tests so we can measure the speed. I think it's something very slow, like 2 centimeters a year or something, the speed of plate tectonics. And from that, the assumption is that going from one landmass called Pangaea to where we are now is around about 200 million years. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe that's the current narrative. And to demonstrate that, I'll just get this little video going on in the background whilst I'm talking. Okay, so if I press play here, this will go on. So it's counting down from 185, 180. As the number of million of years gets smaller, this is showing how Pangaea is breaking up, moving into more like the way we know the continents to be today. And in doing so, it's creating mountain ranges. Things are getting pushed together, pushed up, creating these vast areas of high places. Here we go, starting to get there now, about halfway through. Okay, but this is a general sort of narrative. This is the consensus generally about how long these things took. It's starting to take shape now. We can sort of look at South America here, Africa. It's now starting to take a little bit more the shape we know today. The bit I live in is very small there in the UK. This is saying it was at one point part of Europe as a landmass, and then there we go. That's where we are today. Okay, so that's enough of that. Now, the thing is about the speed of that. Again, it's another assumption, another narrative that I would like to challenge. And I did a little bit of maths on this. If we're talking 200 million years, obviously we weren't there, we don't know that, but it's based on an assumption of the speed we see things going today. And we've been observing for a while, not exactly how long, maybe 100, 200 years. There was a test done with chains under the ocean, I believe, and when they got to a certain tension and broke, they knew that they would break when they got to 2 centimeters or something stretch, and they knew how long it took. Don't quote me on that, but there was some kind of test to show how quickly the plate tectonics was moving. These were the ones that were going apart about 2 centimeters a year, I believe. Okay, so I've just checked that on Google, and it says about 1.5 centimeters a year. Okay, so based on that, that's how they've worked out this thing. Now, I have this thing. Now, let's say if you see a car driving, and you have a speed gun, and you can look at this car driving, and you go, "Oh, it's going 10 miles an hour." Yep, it's going 10 miles an hour. It's going 10 miles an hour, and you observe that driving for say 20 seconds, and it's going 10 miles an hour. Okay, you got some data. Do you assume it's always traveled at 10 miles an hour? What was it doing? What speed was it doing an hour ago? What speed was it doing 2 hours ago? Now, I know that in science there has to be some assumptions when people are putting forward theories, but at the end of the day, they are still assumptions. Now, the Pangaea to where we are now is based on such an assumption. And it may be right, it may be wrong. I'm not here to tell you what to believe as normal. I'm just wanting to challenge the narrative and get people to ask questions. So I thought to myself, well, if it's 200 million years and Noah's flood was about 4,500 years ago, let's just say that we had been observing plate tectonics for the last 4,500 years. Now, I know we haven't, but let's give the benefit of the doubt and say, if there's a chunk of 4,500 years there, what proportion of that is of the 200 million years, that we've been observing? And the way I worked it out was this. Imagine if the 200 million years was a 24-hour period. Let's say we've condensed it down. It's a 24-hour period. That means that last 4,500 years of that is the equivalent of 1.94 seconds, or 1.944 seconds to be slightly more precise. So about 2 seconds. And that's assuming we'd been observing for 4,500 years. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that we'd been observing that plate tectonics had been going at the same speed for the last 4,500 years. It's the equivalent then of observing something moving for 2 seconds within a 24-hour period, and then assuming it's always gone at that speed. And hey, you might be fine with that. I'm a little bit more skeptical. Just because something has been observed to be going at a slow speed now, I don't just necessarily go along with the assumption that that means it's always been going at that speed. Now, I might have my own personal take about the biblical flood and things that may have been going on with the surface, the breaking up of the ground, the movement of plate tectonics and the speed of that and all that kind of stuff. But that's just my personal take. Okay, I'm not asking anybody here to suddenly flip their worldviews or anything like that. I just want to challenge the narrative and get these thoughts out there so that people might ask questions themselves of these assumptions. So why am I rambling on about this? Well, it's all about the high places. Remember I said I wasn't sure if there would be enough water to cover all the high places. Well, my question would be, were the high places pre-flood as high as they are now? Most people would probably say, yeah, of course. The things have hardly changed, 1.5 centimeters a year. Okay. But I might also challenge that and say, well, maybe things were going a little bit quicker during the flood. Who knows? If we're entertaining that idea, we must at least entertain the idea that things may have been moving differently back then. In terms of high places mentioned in the Bible pre-flood, I don't think there's a whole lot of information there to go on. I do know that after the flood, the ark was said to have landed on the mountains of Ararat, so it does refer to them as mountains. Now, whether they were mountains before the flood or just after, I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know. And how high is the mountain? But even if it's a pretty high mountain, could it be covered by effectively 4 times the amount of water that is currently in the oceans? Probably, in my opinion. But hey, I could be wrong. These are just ideas and theories, thoughts of mine. A lot of this channel is just going to be me thinking out loud. So, a quick recap. The narrative is there wasn't enough water for the biblical flood to have happened, and the high places were too high for the water to have covered them. I believe I've given a challenge to that narrative, with the water underneath the earth being a lot more than the amount on it. Also the fact that the plate tectonics and the pushing up of high places, some of that might have happened rapidly during the flood and made things higher now than they were back pre-flood. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Am I just talking a load of nonsense to you? Do you just think this is all silly and you believe the narrative? That's absolutely fine. I know my takes are very unusual. But if the narrative is going to be that the biblical flood couldn't have happened due to the water and the high places, I'm hoping that this video is showing that that's not necessarily true, and I'm challenging that narrative. If this is your first time to this channel and you'd like to see a bit more about this ginger weirdo talking about these strange things, then go and hit the like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff, and I will catch you all on another video. Bye.